Okay, so today we're going to look at Europe plunging into war. And this is just part one of our guided notes for 14.2. 14.2 is a pretty large section because it pretty much covers the beginning to the end of the war with the signing of the armistice. So we're just going to look at the war from 1914 to roughly 1915, 1916 in today's video lecture. So in his book, Origins of the World War, Sidney Bradshaw Fay states his position on what he believed were the causes of the war. And he stated, nevertheless, a European war broke out. Why? Because in each country of Europe, political and military leaders did certain things, which lead to the mobilization of their armies for war. And finally, to the declaration of war. Or you have leaders who failed to do certain things which might have prevented the war. In this sense, all the European countries, in greater or lesser degree, were responsible for the outbreak of World War I. But what we're going to see as we venture through this war, we are quite aware of the roles that certain countries played in the beginning. One country, in the end, will have to take full blame for this war. The Great War, the war to end all wars, or we now refer to World War I. So we know from our powder keg notes and from our timeline notes of the different steps that are taken. We know that Russia mobilizes their troops along the border of Austria, Hungary, and Germany. We know that Germany did not react kindly and said, remove your troops from my border or we're going to war. Russia didn't move their troops. Germany declares war, but they knew by going to war with Russia, they could then attack France. To attack France, they cut through Belgium, which then brings Great Britain into the war against Germany. We know that by mid-August 1914 that we have two camps in this war. You're either part of the Central Powers or you're going to be an ally. We do have some neutral countries who are not going to get involved, but we're going to focus on our Central Powers and our allies. Our Central Powers, we know, is made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. The Allies will have Great Britain, France, Russia. Note that Italy has switched sides. China, Japan, Portugal. All the countries are going to bring their colonies into the mix. And then we are also going to have the rest of the countries that make up the Balkan region. We know that Germany had the Schlieffen Plan, and that plan was to defeat France quickly, then swing around and take out Russia. They thought France would be an easy target and that Russia was too big and slow to be mobilized in time to set up a two-front war. German army does quickly advance to the outskirts of Paris, although Belgium did put up a little bit of a fight, stronger a fight than Germany had anticipated. We're going to see that this is going to end up being forced into a retreat at the First Battle of the Marne, and we're going to have another Battle of the Marne later on into this war. And really, when you look at this plan, Germany did understand Bismarck when he said, you cannot handle a two-front war. So they believed they were going to be successful. But what we end up having is a stalemate where they're going to get stuck in northern France. And when we look at the Western Front, we're going to see trench warfare. It's going to be heavily used. And it's a very heavy battle zone. And this is where they're going to get stuck here in the trenches. And it's going to be brutal. Here is just a map just showing where those trenches are dug out. So we're here in northern France, and we can see some of our main battles that are going to take place. We're going to look at the Battle of Verdun. We're going to look at the Battle of the Somme, and we're also going to look at Passchendaele, the Third Battle of Ypres. So these are some battles that we are going to focus on, and you can see here, looking at this particular map, we have Germany, we have Belgium, and then we're here in France. So this area is heavily fought, and it's going to be destroyed by the time we get to the end of this war. We see where we have main Allied attacks here in purple, and then where we have the main German attacks here kind of in the hot pink. And we're going to see that the Battle of Verdun was a place of judgment where the Germans thought, we can figure this out. We can use the war of attrition, and we're going to see how that plays out next week. We will see how what they have on paper for the Battle of the Somme looks like this will be a slam dunk victory for the Allies in this particular battle. It's not going to be. And then we're going to see how someone being overly cautious is going to end up losing a lot of their people's lives. So, when we look here at the Western Front and this battle line, it's going to be devastating. War in the trenches. Whew, they really thought, you have both sides that are going to dig these trenches here in order to put their soldiers. So when we have the trenches, we have armies that are fighting from within, going out, and you can see here, these are like dugouts. You want to be careful. You don't want your head up too high because you could get shot. And then we also have some very enormous rats here. On Monday, you're going to actually become officers and explore what it's like living in these trenches and having to make decisions. We definitely are going to see a lot of deaths and very small land gains, which is something that they weren't anticipating. We have these industrialized nations that have weapons that they'd never used before, but they are still using the same military strategy as past wars, and that's not going to be successful here. So we are not going to see, battles where we have these enormous victories. You might gain a little bit today and lose a bit next week, and it just keeps going back and forth, and that's where we end up with that bloody stalemate. Life in the trenches is going to be miserable, difficult, and unsanitary, and you're not going to want to share that information at home. The government is censoring what's going back and forth between the soldiers and their families, and they definitely do not want to get the people at home to start to distrust what's going on with the government decisions. New weapons. This is an industrialized world, and so this industrialization, we're going to see countries start to shift their economies, their factory systems to produce for this war effort. And we will see where one country comes up with a military, technology, another one's going to counter it. And so what are these weapons going to do? They're going to lead to more deaths. Massive loss on both sides at the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. And we're going to look a little bit more into that in our PBS series called Slaughter. Here's just some pictures of some of the new technologies that's coming out. The Dreadnought is pretty much just going to make everyone else's Navy obsolete. Big Bertha, and this was named after a military officer's wife. I would be upset if I was Bertha and they make something, they call it Big Bertha. And the shells that would be shot out of this. So this is what's being dragged or pulled across into Belgium as they're pulling out the weapons they used against Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo. They really did not have a chance against Big Bertha. We have the Victor's machine gun. We're going to see the use of gas in this war and the different stages of gas that they're going to use, and then the use of gas masks, and not only for the people, but we're also going to see them on the horses as well. U-boats, unrestricted submarine warfare. The use of U-boats in World War I will not even be compared to the use that we're going to see in World War II. And then we have the introduction of tanks. And at first they are a little, they are a little cumbersome, but we'll all see with the big ditches and craters that will happen with all the shelling, how some of these tanks will get stuck and they'll stand straight up. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to some of this technology that they are coming up with. But again, this war continues for 4 years, and as we move through these 4 years, we constantly see new advancements in technology to help each side. The Eastern Front is going to be a little different. This is along the German, Russian, and Austrian-Hungarian border. We are going to see a little bit more movement on the Eastern Front than the Western Front because we see more trench warfare in the West. Unfortunately for Russia, they're not going to be as successful as they had hoped they would be along this front line. Here is just showing you a map of offenses by the Central Powers, and then you also have from the Allied powers, and we definitely see that, they are going to get a little bit further back in there. We will also see some action down here in the Ottoman Empire, and here we have the Battle of Gallipoli, and we'll look a little bit more at Gallipoli next week. Russia is going to struggle. We had mentioned this early on as we were moving into this war, that Russia had lost the Russo-Japanese War and their navy was pretty much destroyed. Russia is also dealing with political, social, and economic turmoil within their own country. And Russia was hoping that this war would become a distraction, that people would rally behind nationalism and not think about the stuff they were complaining about back home. Well, they're going to suffer enormously in this war. I mean, they have very few supplies. You have soldiers who are venturing off into war where some are given, here's a gun, here's 2 bullets, you two need to make this work. And we're going to have people back home who are rising up and rebelling and demanding economic changes and political changes and social changes. Now, what is going to work to Russia's advantage is the fact that they have a huge army. But you don't have supplies for this army. They don't have the train system that they need to get the items back and forth. And when they finally do, in 1916, they leave the war in 1917 because they end up with 2 revolutions within 1 year. But one of the things that is great by having Russia in this war, Germany is being forced to fight on 2 fronts. And that means Germany has to split their troops. They have to split their supplies on 2 fronts. They are not able to focus all of their manpower and supplies in the West. So if we can keep Russia in this war, Germany will have to be divided in how they focus on fighting. The Battle of Gallipoli was the Allies' attempt to try to get supplies into Russia. So we know that Russia has been trying to get a warm water seaport. And it's probably at this point in time when France and Great Britain thought, man, when Russia was trying to fight the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean War and get that warm water seaport, we probably should have allowed them to do it because now they needed that access. They needed to get up through the Dardanelles and into the Black Sea and get supplies into Russia because they know they need Russia to stay in this war. When we look at the 2 sides, we are going to have the British, the Australians, the New Zealanders, and they're going to be against the Ottoman Empire. And we will have some Germans who will also be down there. But it's mainly versus the Ottoman Empire here. And the Ottoman Empire see this as a do or die situation. They are trying to hold on to their homeland. They see this as could be a continuation of imperialism and what happens if they lose this holding of their land. So this is a nationalistic uprising that we see happening here from the Ottoman Empire. We're also going to look at a group called Anzac Girls, a group of women who will come from Australia and New Zealand as nurses here in Gallipoli. And we're going to see their perspective of what's going on here. In the end, the Allies are not going to be successful. This will be a blow to the British, and it's going to be a blow to Russia because we're not going to be able to get the supplies that they're desperately needing in order to stay in the war. So what I'd like for you to do at this time is go back to your 14.2 terms and questions, and you will go into our absent folder. And within the absent folder, I will have this PowerPoint listed, and you won't have the video attached to it, but you will be able to click through and double check with your answers to my answer key, and I would like for you to make any corrections that you need to. All right, so I'm looking forward to covering the rest of all of this stuff with you on Monday through Friday. This is a great section to view, and you guys have a good weekend.